this is an ancient way, but it's new, and so you can't find any books out there on this, and it's being discovered and rediscovered and being outworked. But my personal understanding of it is this is a relational way. It's not an old order structure that we're trying to set up. It's relational, and everything needs to function through a relational way of doing things. And so when I've been involved in setting up 3 benches of 3 now, in terms of in my own personal sphere, we just hung out together. You know, that's how it worked. When I looked at a regional thing, there was some prophetic things that drew 3 people together, and we all saw sort of visions that interconnected, and one person decided, look, we need to get together, so they gave an invite and 3 of us came together, and all we did is we just used to sit down and we would sort of just talk, share heart, share the things that God was showing us, doing those sorts of things. And as a result of that, things began to shift spiritually for all of us in our different spheres, because we come from, in this regional bench, we operate from across a region which is sort of about 70-80 miles across. And you know, we're as a church right up in the north, and then there's a group down in the south, and then there's in the middle. And so we just used to meet, talk, share. But we found that God was doing things, and I would share something, and then that would be resonating with one of the others, and they would begin to do that, and it would change what they were doing, and we had this sort of just relational thing. And then I just brought this whole thing of a bench of 3, because neither of the others had heard of it. So I just said, look, this is what God's doing with us in our church. This is what we feel is going on in the governmental spheres in heaven. This is where God is using people who are not known, not recognized, nameless, faceless, who aren't looking to set up some old order structure to bring a control system into place, but there are people who are just being called together, responding to the sound that's coming out of heaven, and are being drawn into positions of authority, where in the heavens they can do things that will release blessing on the earth and will release the kingdom to be manifested in a greater dimension, in a greater way. And so it was very, at that point, very, very loose, we just come together. But then as I shared that, I just left that, but the other 2 heard that, went away, thought, wow, yeah. And one of them immediately recognized that they already had a bench of 3 in their grouping, but they didn't really call it that, and so it wasn't functioning that way. So they adopted that immediately. And then we felt, when we came back together the next time, I sort of said, well, how do you feel? And they said, oh, this has totally shifted everything. Actually, now we need to recognize, are we called to that? And so we felt we were called as a regional apostolic council, as this bench of 3, and we then stepped into heaven together. And that was the first thing we did. And that was January last year, not this January, previous year, 2013. We each brought a scroll for each other's ministry during the year, and we brought it in, stepped into heaven, went before, probably, at that point I had no idea what court we were stepping into, but we were probably stepping into the court of strategy, and we went into that court of war, and each of us saw something for the other person's scroll, and we all saw it sealed, and we saw this, and we brought this out, and that actually totally transformed and set the direction for what we as a church here did last year, into operating from that scroll and seeing a new governmental system formed here. Even though we have a bench of 3, there was this thing that actually God was requiring something outworking from that, which would incorporate the ministry here rather than just the church and everything else. So it was really great, you know. So that it started relationally. We are very relational in that we've had to work through issues of different ways of seeing things, different sorts of things that have been going on, and it's been a challenging year, but actually we've come through that stronger in relationship, having talked openly and honestly, really making sure that the enemy has no access to divide or to separate, that we're really totally open with each other, and that's been, really, really beneficial. And now in this process, and I'll highlight this because this is sort of like a process and steps that have gone on. I was praying in December and asking God for just coming before Him, and I sort of came into His presence around the ark, and He started to talk to me about this sound and resonating, and then he gave me this direction to release this sound over our region here, and to call forth others who were just hearing the sound, but to be just really cryptic and just say something that was using this sort of heavenly language and see who responded. And so we then came together with 7 of us came together because we actually felt that the 2 benches needed to come together and the guy in the middle, and we came together and we just began to do exactly the same thing. We just hung out. We felt a liberty in the spirit. We felt revelation was there. We felt we had access to step into heaven together, which we did, and we brought agreement. And so this statement that God had given me, I presented, and we said, okay, we need to find agreement where the 3 found an agreement with the apostolic, the prophetic, and the was it the lion, the ox, and the eagle, and so that sort of kingly, apostolic, prophetic 3 needed to find the priestly agreement with the man of the 4th part of the 4 faces of God that would open up the window of heaven. And so there was a sort of a process of discovery. We didn't sort of read a book and think, oh, this is how we're going to do it. We just followed the pathway of relationship and followed God obediently. Whenever He showed us something, we did it. Whenever we proceeded with that, then He would show us something else. And so that's developed. Now, in terms of that, at one stage, we then had to say, okay, we feel called to this, but we have to get mandated from heaven for that call. And so once we'd stepped in for each other, and that was a scary thing because we'd never done it, and it was like, oh, is this going to work? Are we going to see anything? Are we going to engage in anything? So it was always sat there thinking, how do we do this? And we're like, well, let's do it. We don't know how to do it. We're going to step in and see what we see. And we had no idea really what we were doing, other than, okay, we're going to trust that God's going to show us something. So we stepped in, and that's when we first saw the different scrolls and things. So then, subsequent to that, it was, okay, now we need to acknowledge that we are called to this. We've developed the relationship. We've developed this sense where we know we can work things through with each other. We know that we can step into heaven together. So, okay, we need to step in now and get a mandate from God for what He's calling us to do. And we need to get mountains to sit on and thrones to operate from. And so, again, we thought, well, how do you do this? Well, let's just step in through the open door that's open. We'll let Jesus direct us. And we each found ourselves on a mountain, and we were each on a throne. And we were seeing different things. We were each given different weapons, and we were given a crown and a scepter and a mantle. And in that, there was a mandate, and we saw something specific in terms of what we were called to do, in terms of releasing apostolic heavenly government to facilitate whatever God wanted to do over our region in an earthly sphere. And we'd had previous connection with the angel over our region, and he had a spade in his hand, and he had a torch in the other hand, and he was a huge angel that stretched 75 miles across with his leg on the south and his leg on the north, and we engaged with that angel, and that angel gave us revelation that he was going to unblock ancient wells, and he was going to dig new wells, and that those wells would be set on fire, and that fire would be pillars that went up into the heavens and connected with the atmosphere and connected with heaven. And so we saw some of those things. So there's some prophetic connection around that, which we received. And so that's continued, and we're just looking to be obedient in doing what God's called us to do. Now, I would say that my understanding has increased quite dramatically in having stepped into doing these things. So I went to Ireland in November, and I was invited to go, and I went to a group there who's been meeting with Ian for 4 years, and I went in there and again just relationally began to hang out with them, and he had set 3 of them as a bench, and he had prayed over them, and he'd released them to be a bench, but none of them had been in heaven on their mountain or on the throne, and none of them had been given the scroll. They'd just been prayed for by Ian. So they were like, well, what do we do? You know, how do we do this? You know, so it was a privilege to be involved in taking them to their mountain and getting them enthroned and seeing them having a release of mantles and weapons and different things that they all saw, and so they had this engagement, and I thought, well, that's great, that's really excellent. And while I was flying over to Ireland on a plane, I saw this white dragon circling in the atmosphere, and I was like, you know, I've seen a few white dragons before, but I was thinking, okay, I'm not going to say anything about this. I want to see what this means. So I saw this dragon, so I thought, well, okay, there's some opposition here, something's going on. But having taken these 3 guys to their mountains, whatever, then it's like, well, where do we go from there? And so I spent sort of some time with them over the weekend, and with a small group of probably about 15, 20 of them who had been pursuing things again with Ian and stuff, and led them on some exercises and looked to engage them with them. And it came up in conversation with the lady I was staying that couple of weeks previously that she had this dream in which she was being chased by this white dragon flying through the air. So I thought, okay, there's something here that we need to deal with. So on the last day, I sort of said, okay, do you recognize these 3 as being called to be a bench of 3? And everyone said yes. And so I said, okay, well, we need to go into heaven, and we need to go into the court, and we need to get the scroll that gives them a mandate for what they're called to do, because they hadn't had the full mandate. They felt God saying certain things, and so I did that. I took them there, and I prophetically saw this scroll, and I saw various things of 7. I saw 7 mountains, and for each mountain I saw a chest, and I saw different things in a prophetically going into this scroll room and getting this scroll, which I just released to them, and I basically said, look, I need to deal with this dragon. So I felt authorized, because I wasn't going to do this if I didn't feel authorized to do it. It's almost like I was coming into their sphere, but I'd been invited by them. So I said, look, you know, I feel authorized, but I need to get your permission to deal with this dragon. And so I dealt with the dragon. I came because I given that permission from a bench of 3. You have a higher authority, so you're able to come above the dragon and come down on top of it. If you fight a dragon from below, it can be quite intimidating. So you need to come from it to take its head off and deal with it. So I did that, and then opened it up, and out came the 4 things of 7 that are applied to these 7 mountains for Ireland and different things. So I released that to them, and just released the revelation, and they saw things, and they took that scroll and whatever. So, you know, that was another process of where the 7 mountains began to become real. Here, you know, 3 years ago, God showed me, the mountains that we have here as a church, and there were 7 mountains, and there were various things that were on those mountains that needed to be dealt with. And we have a bench of 3 that's there to release those mountains to be occupied. Now, God forbade me to go on those mountains because it wasn't my role. Although I was sorely wanting to get things moving, it was like, no, he didn't let me. And so we had to have a process where we began to call people to take responsibility for those mountains. And at the beginning, I thought, okay, well, here's a mountain that's going to have someone taking responsibility, and then they're going to operate in this, and they're going to release these other things. But it became really apparent that everything works on the basis of the same pattern. So if there is this pattern that there's 3 that operate on a mountain, well, then if there's other mountains operating below that, then they ought to have 3 on it as well. And that if each 3 has 7 that are associated with it in operation, then each mountain would have 7 also associated with it in terms of the outworking of it. And so each sphere has different aspects of the sphere, and different people are called to different aspects of the sphere. But it's just like a fractal image. Everything that's in the micro scale also operates in a bigger scale. So the more you look at it, you see this, then you look at it again, you see it, and then you look at it again. It just outworks as a pattern, as a fractal image. So what God has created in heaven gets outworked through everything. But sometimes you can't see it unless you look. And one of the classic nature examples of a fractal is a fern. And if you look at the big picture of a fern, it's like got a central core and it's got fronds coming off. But if you look at each frond is made up of the same thing, a central core with things. And if you look at each one that's made up of that, it's the same. So it's just a pattern after a pattern after a pattern that gets outworked. And so what I've begun to see is that God is releasing a sound out of heaven. It's the sound that's responding to the groan of creation, looking for the manifestation of the sons of God that it talks about in Romans 8, so that creation will be restored to its order. And God is raising up people who are hearing his sound to bring them into resonance and harmony and agreement with him, so that he can use them to deal with creation and to bring godly order back into creation. Now, when I first saw this, I just thought of, okay, this is church, and church has this, and church is government, this structure, and you have the battle between the pastoral and the apostolic, and all the stuff that Ian shared, and Ian brought that when he came here, and he brought that revelation, and I heard it and thought, wow, yeah, I can see that. It's been in operation here. We need to respond, and we need to put into place something that patterns after heaven, because God had spoken to us about rewiring the house and preparing the house for glory and things like that. So my immediate reaction was just church, our church mountains, this is what we're going to do. And it wasn't until really last year that I was taken out into the heavens and shown a globe of the world, shown the world, and basically I had to take it and place it within me. That changed my heart from just being focused locally to being willing to release a resource wider afield. Now, I know, I've had that call, and we have a call here to be an apostolic resource to people, but outworking it, I felt somewhat reticent to do it. And it wasn't until God put that into my heart, in an encounter, that it changed me to therefore look outwards and say, okay, I need to be proactive in reaching out and sharing what God's doing, and releasing this revelation that I've been blessed with, and to help. And so then that opened the doors for these sort of connections with people, and the different groups of people that there are. I had this forum that opened the door for that, and then I began to just hook up with several people in mentoring sessions originally, sort of back in the beginning or middle of the year, I guess. And as I've done that, then the revelation of what God wants to do with benches and authority and bringing apostolic blueprints out of heaven to bring transformation on the earth really has started to take shape more clearly. And so I've seen that it is a process, and there is always a temptation to make it structural, but I'm just not going to follow that. I want to find relationship with people that I can help and support and encourage to release them, but there is no being over anybody or anything like that. It's actually supporting people. And so even where there's a bench of 3 and there are 7 mountains, it's not like, oh, well, we're lording it over the mountains. It's actually, no, we're here to raise people up, to call people forth, to release those mountains for others to occupy and to outwork, and to provide the blueprint that gives sort of direction, but actually it's to release people into their destinies and release people into fulfilling their destinies. And so, there is a process to follow in this. And what I do see now is that these aren't necessarily physical places. They can be benches of 3 which are to do with different spheres of influence. It could be to do with a regional area. It could be to do with a town. It could be to do with a church. It could be groups of people that God is just drawing together that right now are just actually church, but they're not called church. But then church is unfortunately been something which has been, the name has been used for something which it isn't really. The whole Greek word ecclesia really just meant called out ones, called and gathered out ones to something. So God is gathering people for something, and those people, it is church, because it is it says in Ephesians that the manifold wisdom of God is to be made known to the spiritual dimension through the church, but just not the institutional structure that it's become, but those who are called, who hear the call to come together to form relationships for the purpose of outworking the vision that they're hearing the call about. And so that's really what church is. And so there are groups all over the place that are church that actually wouldn't be seen classically as being church, because they may never actually meet one another physically. They may be spread over a region or spread over the world, in fact, but they're called together because they're hearing a particular sound that joins them together. And so then when they then come together, then there is understanding the nature of how authority in the heavens works. And so normally we've been used to exercising authority on the earth, which is horizontal, and we try and work together on the earth to do things. But the revelation that God is given is that everything has to be done in heaven first. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now, in the past, that's been taken as, well, as it is in heaven, that's just God's will. So God's will in heaven will be outworked on earth, and it's nothing much to do with us. But actually, God is raising up sons who have responsibility to bring that governmental order. And so they have responsibility to actually do the as it is in heaven, so that heaven can be manifested on earth, because God wants us to be responsible as his sons. So sons don't just sit and wait for their father to do everything. The father releases the sons with the same authority that he has, just as he did with Jesus, to make this connection between heaven and earth. And he came operating in dual realms of heaven and earth at the same time. And so that's the model. And so we can do that, living under an open heaven with the doorway open, so we can access and live in two places connected at the same time. And so I feel that this sound is being released. People are hearing the sound, but now relationally we need to find, well, who are being connected to who, and then there is an investiture process that needs to go on. They need to be invested with authority to operate as lords, and that's the first stage. Everyone really who is called to operate in that sphere of kingdom influence has to be on their own mountain. If you've not got your own mountain and you're not ruling your own spheres, then it's very difficult to do anything in a sense higher than that, because lordship is where you outwork the vision of the king, if you like, which is great, and lordship's a responsible position, but actually kingship is a level where you begin to make your own things for lords to outwork. So you begin to get your apostolic guidance and direction, and from the vision of God and the heart of God, and from the mandates of the scroll that you have. And so everyone needs to understand that on their own scroll, they're called to operate in that governmental sphere. So it's really easy to sort of say, right, we're going to raise up loads of benches of 3. Who's up for it? And loads of people will say, oh yeah, I'm up for it. I feel called to that. But they might not necessarily yet be on their own mountain. They may not yet have their own mandate or seen their own scroll. They may just feel drawn in their heart, which is great, because I think that's where things get drawn. You recognize and you feel a connection, and you feel, yeah, there's something stirred in me when someone said that, or some prophetic word gets released and your heart jumps and your spirit jumps at it, which is great. But we're in the early stages, really, of just pursuing this. And the first thing is, okay, who feels they're hearing something of the sound of heaven? And then when people begin to hang out together, it's like, okay, what does that sound mean? Are you on your own mountains yet? Have you been invested with your own scepters and scroll? And have you seen your scroll and that sort of stuff? Now, when people have done it personally, then when you begin to come together corporately as a 3, then you're taken to a higher level within the kingdom of heaven, and you're invested with thrones there, which are because you already operate in a degree of that in your own life. And so not everybody necessarily will be called to be a bench of 3 in that realm, but I believe everyone potentially will be a bench of 3 somewhere in some mountain, because there is something that they're called to do to operate in kingdom authority. Even if that's on their own lives, they still will probably join with people in outworking the vision and things like that, because it's relational. God doesn't want any of us to be isolated on our own, doing things our own way with no accountability and no responsibility to anybody. So because God is a kingdom, and within a kingdom there is accountability and responsibility to the king. We're all responsible to God. But when we become part of a bench, we're also responsible to each other, and we're accountable to each other, not for our personal individual things that God of our lives, but actually for the mandate that we've been given. So part of the process will be, in raising up benches, will be, okay, here's the mountains, but then what is the scroll? What are the 7 spheres that you've been given as a bench to operate under, in a sense, to release? And so then once you have the mandate and you have that scroll, it's okay, we now need to release this. And so you call forth those to be raised up to those mountains, and those mountains may be, many things. And I think I don't want to describe it too much, because then people need to go and get the scroll and know what's on it. And right now I'm working with a guy who I've sort of got to know over the last year or so in just mentoring one-on-one, who is starting a church. And it's been really exciting to see his journey in engaging heaven and engaging the mountains in his own life and dealing with dragons and doing that sort of stuff. And I've just been helping him along the way. But he felt called, and I knew he was going to be called quite a long time ago, but I didn't say anything, because it's up to God to do that sort of thing. So I when he said, I feel God saying this, I said, well, okay, I can affirm that, because I saw God say that. And in a sense, I'm quite envious of his situation, because he's been able to start from total scratch. So he got a mountain, and then he reached out to 2 others, and they became a bench of 3, and then they went and got their mandate, and then they got their 7 mountains, and they got 7 scrolls for their mountains, and now they're just working out this process, doing it as it should be, which I think is just awesome. You know, and I sort of you know, I'd be really privileged just to be involved in that. But I know that God has called me to help in this process and to help others to get their scrolls and to then start operating in authority. And I'm just here to support and help. And so, you know, I haven't got it all worked out. I haven't got a book that says this is it, because you have to do it relationally. It may well be different in every situation. The scrolls will be different. The way God calls people to do it will be different because of who they are. You know, and yes, in terms of benches of 3, they have to carry apostolic governmental authority. But, you know, are they an apostle and a prophet, and do you need 3 of one and 1 of the other and whatever? I think we just need to be flexible and just see what God does. Because yes, it does need apostolic, and that means a willingness to bring blueprints and a willingness to bring vision and to bring direction, but you can make it too tied down, you know, and I don't want to tie it down. It has to be this, and then, well, I don't feel I've got that gift, but I feel called. Then it causes confusion. So if we just leave it that, okay, God will call those people, and they will have their redemptive gifts, and they will have their particular ways that God's called them to function, because we're all unique, and it will work out if we're just obedient to God and respond. If we try and structure it really specifically that it has to be this and it has to be that, then I think it could tie people down and restrict. And this is not about restricting, it's about releasing. And I'm sure God has got so many different ways he would like to do it, and according to the people he's chosen to be involved. And that's why it's got to be relational. You have to find how it works for each individual 3, and then you have to find how it works for the 7 things, and see how it actually outworks and functions in that. So I think that's probably enough of an answer on that. So have you got any sort of follow-up questions, or any other specific things around that, or anything that isn't clear, that still isn't clear, or you think you want me to clarify? Then I'm, you know, again, really happy to do that.
I don't know, but I just want to. You said something about your scroll. I want to ask: did you see your scroll like a scroll, or did you perceive by thoughts and feelings?
Both, really. I mean, initially I saw the scroll as a picture, as an image of something which I related to personally when it was my own personal scroll. I've subsequently looked at it and been shown it many times, and sometimes I just know what it's there. You know, to be honest, this is where it doesn't really matter, so long as you at the end of the day perceive what it is that God is revealing on that scroll. That's what matters. Whether it comes through, you see it as a vision, you hear the thoughts in your mind, you have the impression of what it is, you just get the perception. So it's knowing, okay, this is what God is showing, revealing, giving me insight into, and I'm going to go with that. I mean, the key into this really is there's not a restriction about how many benches there can be. And so you may have people who are associated with you and the group. There doesn't necessarily have to be a group bench. Oh, this is responsible for the burning one's group. Actually, within the people there may be a number of benches that people are called to different things to associate with. So, you know, it's all about sharing heart and vision. So when you share your passion for releasing people into their destinies, for causing people to come into their dreams and things like that in a global sense, that actually you've got a bigger perspective than just one church or whatever, you know, do the others, does Angela and Bill, and do you resonate with that? You know, I think I can see Angela nodding, because that's really what will draw you together. You know, both of you. You know, because actually, if you feel called to that, that's your sphere. You don't have to worry about anybody else. And as you come together and you share your hearts and you come together and then you get invested with your thrones together in agreement to just that to start with, we're called to that, then you go and get the mandate, you get the scroll, and you see, okay, what does that mean? And what sort of destiny? And you look at, okay, what are the 7 spheres that God is calling us to function in this? And he'll show you. And I've got no idea, you know, what they are. You know, I could easily go and find out, but I don't like to do that for people, because actually then they're reliant on somebody else. I can lead people to a door and open it, but then people need to go out and find themselves, because otherwise then it's all restricted to 1 or 2 people, when it's about you engaging and you getting what is it that God's saying to you. And so within your group there may well be lots of other benches that are also called, but they may be called for totally different things. They may be called for a region, they may be called for another particular sphere of doing something in the body, or doing something in the kingdom. Who knows? So I wouldn't be too worried about it. What you will want to do as your destiny is obviously to release people into theirs. So you will be part of that, is encouraging those in the group of that you're connected to. Okay, have you thought about your destiny? And it's like what you do will probably facilitate some of that taking place. But there may well be others who are called to something different. That's fine. So, you know, I don't think you need to be considered too much about, okay, well, there's these other people, should they be part of? If you found 3 people who've got the same heart and the same vision, and you work together and you're in a relationship, that's a really good start. You know, and it can develop from there. Yeah.
Can I say something here?
Go for it.
I think what's happening is that we have the passion, and a few of us really feel connected to each other. Yeah. Whether we talk a lot, or, you know, as Elizabeth said, her and I talk a lot, and we really feel connected to Bill and Deborah as well. But I think what we're feeling is inexperienced and a little bit daunting. You know, a lot of us are seeing and perceiving, of course, but we're not. You know, you hear people have very vivid seer experiences, and, you know, a lot of us aren't having those. We're perceiving, we're feeling, but it's not like full on. And I think what we're feeling is a little bit inexperienced in this, and I'm encouraged that we can be mentored to grow in this. So I just wanted to say that, like, because I feel the others, you know, I feel the apprehension that this seems very big, and that's why I mentioned like bite-sized chunks, because if you break it down in a little at a time and just growing together over time, then, you know, for myself, I feel passionate about it, but I also feel very inexperienced, and that it's a daunting thing if you look at the whole all at once.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, let me tell you, everyone's inexperienced. Because when we started doing it here as a church, I contacted Ian and said, hey, that's you know, and he said, oh, that's really great. And then when we saw him again the following year, and we sort of sat down with him as a group of leaders, and we sort of said, okay, you know, we'd really like to ask you some questions. And he was like, I haven't got much clue to give you an answer. You just got to work it out yourselves, which really wasn't very helpful. It was like, because we were looking for, because he said, well, okay, well, in our church, we've just adopted this 3, but we've still got another structure, and we haven't done this, and we haven't done that. And so really what his advice was to say, look at the relationships. If you're in Christ and Christ is in you, then you're all in each other. And so that's the starting point. And if you're looking from a perspective in Christ, in God, together, then that will be blessed and outworked. And so he just sort of simplified it and said, look, you know, there is no pattern, there is no manual for this right now. You just have to continue to pursue God together in relationships, and it will begin to outwork. And so, yeah, breaking it down into smaller pieces is the key. Now, I will really want to sort of to challenge the whole thing that it has to be these great seer visionary things that function, because that is something the enemy will use to restrict and stop people functioning in their call, because they don't think they can do it like somebody else. You just have to be you. You just have to be who God's created you to be. You can all hear God, you can all experience him, you've all had encounters with him. You just have to continue pursuing that, and as you train your senses in that, practice, keep going with it, it becomes more clear and it's easier to perceive. But it doesn't really matter, to be honest, from my perspective, whether you can get a full-on technicolor vision or whether you just get a complete impression. At the end of the day, it will come to the same thing. See, you could have a vision, and many people have visions, and they come to me and ask me the interpretation of it. So having a vision of something doesn't necessarily mean you understand what the vision's about. But if you have God say, oh, here's your 7 things on your scroll, well, you've got really clear. You've heard 7 things. You know, so, you know, I know there's this thing about hearing and seeing. See, I don't see there's any difference, because it's all electromagnetic frequency of something. Whether it's sound or whether it's light, it's all the same. And it's the fact, even thoughts are just the same. Our thoughts or seeing or hearing, it's all basically the same thing. And the main thing is, actually, we can do it. And the more we do it, the easier it becomes and the more confident we get with it. So, you know, if loads of people come and say, right, I feel really confident that I can do this, I would be much more suspicious of that than people who are coming humbly saying, oh, I'm really struggling, I'm not really sure. And because that's what it should be like. We're all learning. If we think we've got it, then we probably haven't. And so it's just learning as we go in a relational way, and God will open it up. And yeah, there is no rush. You know, we don't have to rush into it and feel pressured into it. The reality is we respond to God, and he will show us what needs to be done. And yeah, if there are things where there can be some help or guidance into it, you know, like I did when I went to Ireland, it's like I just opened the door to something greater. Now it's up to them then. Now they're doing that themselves. They're responsible for their own things. I'm here if they ever want to ask me anything, but I wouldn't presume to sort of get in contact and saying, right, you need to do this or you need to do that, because that's not how it works. You know, it's about helping, supporting, and encouraging. And so, you know, if I can help and support, encourage you guys to engage the mountains and to get more clarity about what the scrolls are, then we can do that. That's no problem. But it's certainly, you know, you have the heart, and that's what God's looking for. He's not looking for experts. You know, I think I can't remember who said it, but I quoted it, I think, a few weeks ago in one of my messages. It was about, you know, God would rather have amateurs in the new than professionals in the old. And this is new. Therefore, we're all amateurs. We're all learning. There aren't any professionals. And even those that seemingly further on, when you really talk to them, they're not necessarily so. You know, because I know that Ian's releasing different benches, and there's Ireland and Scotland and Wales and different things. But there's a big difference between just praying for somebody and acknowledging them being called than mentoring them in the process. And, you know, Ian is not a personal mentor for loads and loads of people. I'm sure I know he's got a group of people that he's close with, and he may have connection with others, but actually, you know, he's one who opens revelatory realms for people to engage, and others need to go through and then follow it through. And so you know, if there's anything I can do, then I'm certainly willing to help in doing it. But we're all learning as we go, and I think it's exciting to do that. You know, it's a journey and an adventure and a quest, if you like, that we're on, that we find different things along the way, and we experience different things along the way, and we grow through those experiences. So, you know, I find it a good attitude to say, yeah, we're really in experience. Yeah, we all are. But we only need to be one step ahead of somebody else to help them take that step. And so I don't think there are lots of people who are a lot of steps ahead. I think Ian is maybe, you know, a few years ahead in certain aspects of the courts and the different things, but people catch up really quickly if you are willing. Because one of the key things in engaging with learning and growing in this is engaging wisdom. And so in any bench of three, access to wisdom on the heights and the doors that are there and the different pathways that are there is a key part of that, because wisdom, in my experience, taught me and took me to the courts and took me to show me the protocols and help me understand how things were done and open up the different courts for me. So I'm pursuing wisdom as a relationship with her, because that's what God instructed me to do. And I know that creates a problem for people. Well, we should be pursuing the Father and Jesus, and I have a wonderful relationship with them, and a lot of that relationship with them is in the garden of my own heart and within my own spirit, so that I personally can walk that out and manifest that around me every day. But that's being a gateway of heaven through that relationship. But actually, we are also called to function in rulership, and God has assigned the 7 spirits of God to help us be positioned in rulership. So we need to learn how to engage with them, how to enroll in their training courses, if you like. Wisdom, for me, is the one who is part of that major process in learning things, and so it's good to pursue her. And the Father spoke to me really clearly and said, there is no jealousy. You know, she has been with me from the beginning, and she has been given the authorization to do this. So I'm thinking, well, great, I'm gonna pursue her, and she seems to open up realms of things for me. No, it may be different for others, but you know, I would certainly like to encourage people to pursue wisdom and to be able to engage with her, because I think that will be part of the process. And then, you know, each of us has an angel assigned to our throne. You know, that one who was caretaking for us before we were in that place of maturity. We need to engage there, because that angel is assigned to us to help us with the protocol of the kingdom, what we do on our mountains, and how do we use the things that we've been given effectively. And so, you know, involved with the angelic canopy and the different realms of angels are key in this process, because they are the ministering spirits that have been assigned to us to help us. You know, we're not in this on our own. You know, we've got a whole realm of the angelic. You know, those 10 different canopies of the angels and stuff, they're there for us to engage. And so, you know, engaging with them and learning to engage with them is also key in this whole thing, because that's what Jesus did. They were involved at his birth, they were involved predicting his birth, they were involved in his temptation, they were involved before the cross, they were involved after the cross, yeah, they were involved in his resurrection. They're involved. They were in the early church. So we have to see that there's a key area there for angels and for the angelic realm that we have to learn how to function with. And we learn, you know, and that means we need to learn to function with our own personal angels, and we need to send them out on assignment, and we need to see that they're there again to minister with us and for us. So there's a whole dimension around the angelic that needs to go with this, and again, it's about just practicing and pressing into it and opening up those realms and then learning. You know, on Sunday morning here, I felt, yeah, early in the morning, I really felt to release the seraphim. And so I felt I need to release the seraphim to come with coals from the altar. I didn't tell anybody that. I just felt, okay, sometimes I do tell people. I might tell the musicians sometimes things, but this time I really felt, no, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to see what unfolds. And, you know, I shared a message on Sunday morning, which was, quite challenging. And then we went into a time of worship, and basically everything was about fire. You know, first song they sing, fire never sleeps. You know, and then, you know, the lady we've got who really opens portals with flags and banners and frequencies of color, she used these deep orange colors, and it was all about fire. You know, and yeah, someone brought a prophetic word about stepping through into a new realm, and actually someone actually that's a fire tunnel, so they used the flags, and then people came under the, because the angels were released, you know, and there was a sense of that heat and fire that was present. So, you know, we can do that not just for this sort of natural sphere, but also for the atmosphere of the earth, and to clear the airways so that we can see the fullness of the kingdom that start to manifest. The ancient doors, the everlasting doors, we need to open. And so part of the function of benches of threes are to open those everlasting doors. But you have to do that as you learn. You know, not many people are doing that right now, but more and more will. And I think the key in this is benches of threes are recognized in heaven. They're recognized by the heavenly host. Some may never ever be recognized on earth at all. But does that matter? Not in the slightest. If our hearts are right with God, and it's not about being recognized and having a this or that or the other, God is actually raising up people with no reputations because they've got nothing to lose. Whereas there are some really large ministries who are being challenged to respond to the sound of what God is releasing, and they're struggling because they've got so much to lose, and they've got so much this, that, and the other. And God's looking for obedience. He's looking for people to respond to him, and he will then train, equip, give you everything you need. Because when you get invested with authority, you get invested with what you need. You get new clothes, if you like, that signifies the authority that you have. And so God does all that. So, yeah, there you go.
Bill and Deborah, please talk. Please speak. Come on, Bill.
Hi.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, Mike, that you really, thank you. I think you really broke it down, because when I was looking at it earlier, when we were talking about it on Saturday, I was looking at, wow, that person over there, they are so prophetic. That's got to be the person that, if Elizabeth would consider someone, and that other person over the giftings and the visions they get, they're always, every time they go up there, and you really brought down to earth because of the fact that that wasn't what it was all about. You're not, I guess it's like even when David was sick, you know, it was everyone, he was the last one in the family, you would have probably picked in the natural or in the spiritual sense.
Yeah. Yeah, same with Gideon as well. God doesn't necessarily choose those that the world would choose.
And so when my natural eyes are looking at it, I probably would have gone around and like everything else saying, oh, that person, look at the stuff they come up with and say, and they're always going to experiences and that, and that's not what it's all about anymore.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's God, it's about God taking, what is it, man appoints, but God anoints?
Well, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. It's responding to the call that's being released from heaven, and if you're starting to resonate with that, that's what matters. You know, that's really what will draw you into a harmony. You know, and it's like three sounds. When you think of a bench or you think of music, it's not one note. A chord is not one note. It's actually two or three notes, or three or four notes that come together, when they're played together, they create a fuller sound than you could get with just one note. And so when God is pulling three together, he's bringing it together in harmony so that the sound of the differences can come together to make it sound fuller, if you like. You know, you can play one key on the piano, but if you play 3 or 4 together, the whole sound takes on a completely different dimension. And so that's what God's doing with that, really, I think. So, yeah.
It was interesting also that what you were saying, that while you're on a bench of 3, that within your own congregation, probably just a matter of time before there'd be quite a number of benches of 3 within your congregation itself. They're all, because they all should be taking at some point a position.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, I do feel that this whole thing is being released by God. This is revelation that people are having. And ultimately, there will be choices for churches and people to take, whether they respond to what God's doing and are willing to pattern after heaven rather than pattern after tradition or organization. And so, you know, whether you're a whatever stream or denominational thing, and whether you're a Presbyterian form of church government or an eldership form of government, or, you know, bishops and that form of church government and all that stuff, God is wanting to all those orders to come down to the basics. This is how he's assigned things to operate, with 3s and 7s, and then I think there are also 12s that are associated with councils over wider periods and things. And it's like, okay, let's see who's going to respond. And the challenges of that will bring judgment, because judgment is not God punishing anybody. Judgment is God saying, this is me. Are you going to follow me? And so there's a line drawn that says, this isn't me, this is me. And you can't draw a line without there being 2 sides to the line. It's impossible. So when God says this, it causes people to decide whether they're going to agree with him or disagree with him. And so I think it is coming, but that coming won't be a sudden, it will happen to everyone all at the same time, because judgment doesn't work that way. You know, when God left the temple, when the Spirit left the temple, it didn't leave the temple suddenly. He came suddenly. In the New Testament, he came suddenly, but he didn't leave suddenly. And so there's a sense where God is giving the church, the body across the world, opportunities to respond prophetically to what he's saying. And, you know, this sort of picture of the prophetic timetable that I've put out there indicates that there are these overlapping periods. Now, most of the overlapping periods don't stop until Jesus has returned. He's always going to give his people an opportunity to respond to him. The first response is intimacy, coming into a fresh revelation of the joy of knowing him as Father, of coming into sonship, intimacy. You know, that call has been going on since, you know, 1992, 3, and it was prophesied by Bob Jones 10 years before that, that there was going to be this outpouring of the wine of the Spirit. Now, that drew so many people into intimacy, because obviously Toronto was a major part of that. I experienced it here in 9 months before, and I received that through Rodney Howard Brown's sort of some old videotape. That all of a sudden we had an outbreak of laughter, the whole manifestations of the zoo and stuff that was going on, you know. That was sort of 9 months before what happened in Toronto. And in actual fact, that was where I used to live in Cornwall, which is sort of about 120 miles away. And the very week that Toronto broke out, which I think it was in February 1994, we actually had a series of meetings here where I live now called More for 94. And we had all those manifestations all outworked. And, you know, at that point, no one had heard of them. And it created all sorts of like, whoa, this is weird and wild and stuff. And, you know, we had meetings in a hotel, and we got thrown out of the hotel after 3 days because they couldn't cope with the manifestations of the Spirit that went on. And so, you know, yeah, so I've sort of been part of that, and God has called people into intimacy. People, well, what is all this? What is it about? Why are people laughing? Why are people drunk? Why are people can't move? And there was a sense that he was a call to the church to come into something fresh, and God wanted his church back. Well, that hasn't stopped. Some people still have had no experience of that at all. They're still operating in an old religious system where, the mediatorial priest or minister does it all on their behalf, and they just wait to be told what God says and all that stuff, whereas God wants everyone to hear for themselves. And so that will never change. We're in a period where God is removing the stumbling blocks to gather those things which are obstacles to his kingdom. That won't change until Jesus returns. He will still give people a chance to respond. When the judgment comes upon the church, it will come on the forerunners first, but he will still give people a chance to respond to that judgment right up until he returns, because he's a God of grace. And so every period, other than the period where we're gathering harvesters for the harvest, every other period keeps on going. And so God gives people an opportunity of responding to him saying, this is me, come and follow me. And so we must be very, very careful that we never get critical or judgmental about those who are not yet following. We have to give them the honor for them to respond to God themselves. And so we can't tell people what to do. We can't say, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. All we can do is respond personally and be an apostolic people, Joshua generation, who forerun and then become these sort of prototypes that others can see. Now, part of the problem, what I was obviously sharing on Sunday, was actually most opposition that comes to when God does something new is from the old. It's not from the world. The world is embracing spirituality. It may not be all right, but it's embracing a desire for a more spiritual life. It's the religious institutions that seem to oppose when God does something new. And so we have to be careful that we don't fall into the same pattern of operating with the leaven of Herod and the leaven of the Pharisees, operating with the religious and the political spirit. We have to come with a heart of honesty, openness, generosity, blessing. And yes, we're going to probably experience a whole load of persecution, but our hearts must be to bless and to forgive and to release, and not to set up anything that the enemy can use to hinder and stop people moving forward. Most of the opposition out there to what God's doing comes from other Christians, which is sad, but you just have to recognize that's what the religious and the political thing does, and be aware of that and not follow and fight it. We just have to be obedient in doing what God said. You had Joshua and Caleb, who had a different spirit. You didn't see that they wanted to kill those other 10 leaders who gave a bad report. They just rent their clothes and wept and cried before God, and basically they were just determined, well, we're going to pursue what God's called us to do. And so that whole generation died out, and that Moses generation died out. But the Joshua generation was raised up. And so God gives people an opportunity to respond to his call over and over and over again, and because he's gracious and he longs for people to respond to him. So judgment is not punishment, criticism, anything like that. Judgment just says, God says, well, this is me. And I do believe that his anointing and the glory will leave the old. Not suddenly, but bit by bit, so that people will be, okay, this isn't working anymore. Why is this so hard? Why am I so burdened and heavy laden and carrying this weight? Because they're operating in the old, and there's no anointing anymore, so they need to realize and be drawn, hey, I need to go where God is. And it's a desire that God has that people follow him and pursue him, and so he gives people opportunities to do it. So yeah, I think yes, God's pattern will be outworked on earth, but it won't be necessarily the institutions that take it. It will be people. And so what is church? Your church. We're church now, what we're doing in reality, because we're called to something, we're hearing the sound, we're gathering to it, and that gathering forms an ecclesia, which really is the Hebrew kahal, which was the house, or with the 3 and the 7, and that's what it was. You know, it was the relational house that came together around the sound and then began to outwork it. So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. You want to say? Okay, I thought, yeah, I'm listening to you. I feel like, I've been, as I said, I couldn't sleep last night. This always happens when I have a meeting, a session with you. I couldn't sleep all night like crazy. But I just have this thing in my heart, the whole thing about ecclesia, because that's the real name, the ecclesia of the burning ones. It's a fluid sort of thing. It's nothing to do with a structure, even a group of people like some house group thing or nothing like that. It's just really fluid. I don't know if I could use the word like it's a more spirit thing, really, of people, just people who are, as you said, the ecclesia, the called ones, the ones whose hearts is just burning and heard the sound, wherever that is, across the globe, as it were. And so for me, in my home, I don't see that like, okay, here is something we have here. We have the burning ones here. Like, I don't see it like that at all. I know it seems like, whoo, that's huge, and how to really wrap that around my head. But for me, as Norma said, and Angela said, it's bite size. I have to take her advice. That's good, because sometimes I get overwhelmed with a whole set of things going on, and I can't sleep, and I have to write everything down, and I don't even know how to express it. I just get excited, but I really I feel like if I feel the heartbeat of the Father a lot, and I'm only even now understanding me, right? At my age, right now, understanding some stuff, and like now I know that about birthing. When stuff used to happen to me, I never even know it was birthing stuff into being. So I'm really excited to learn all those things. But I wanted to ask another question. You said something about where the heights meet. I don't know what I mean, and where the pathway meet. What does that mean?
Okay, yeah. It comes from Proverbs chapter 8, and it's about wisdom, and I can read it to you as probably the easiest thing. Proverbs chapter 8 and Proverbs chapter 9 are key chapters in understanding wisdom and engaging with wisdom, and so this is where wisdom is within the realm of the kingdom of heaven. And I think a couple of weeks ago I sort of shared that pictorially in terms of where that is in the dimensions of heaven and where that's connected. But this is what it says in the beginning of chapter 8. Does not wisdom call and understanding lift up her voice? On the top of the heights, beside the way, where the paths meet, she takes her stand. Beside the gates, at the opening to the city, at the entrance of the doors, she cries out. To you, O men, I call, and my voice is to the sons of men. And then a little bit later on in verse 12, verse 14, says, counsel is mine, sound wisdom, and I am understanding, power is mine. By me kings reign, and rulers decree justice, and nobles all who judge rightly, and princes rule. And I love those who love me, and those who diligently seek me will find me. And it goes on into different things. And then in the beginning of chapter 9 it says, wisdom has built her house, she has hewn out her 7 pillars, She has prepared her food and has mixed her wine, and she has also set her table, and she sent out her handmaidens. She calls from the top of the heights of the city. And so that is the place where I've engaged wisdom. Now, probably 3 years ago, I had an encounter where I came with this big pillar of blue light on this place where I didn't recognize, and it was just like, whoa, what is this? And that was my first encounter, but I didn't see wisdom herself. I just saw the place. Now, that place is the entrance into the realm of heaven. So the heights, the entrance to the gate to the city, is the gate into the city of Zion, into the mountain of God, and so it gives access into the higher realms of heaven. But there are also doors there which give you access into different dimensions, and there are pathways there which come from the different dimensions that give you access to them, and there's also the way, which is the timeline, where you can access the past and the present and the future. So it's where the past meets the present for the future, and so all that's there accessible in that place. And it is a place, it's a dimensional place that we can go, and I've been there, and I've helped others to go there, and other people have been there, and they've sort of shared with me as well, and I was like, wow, yeah, we've seen some stuff here. And our bench of 3 go there, and we see where the paths meet, and we see things coming for the path. And I've been through, personally, I've seen 4 doors, and I've engaged through 3 of those doors. Well, one I've opened and looked and sort of saw what was through and didn't go through it, but 2 of them I've been through. And those 4 doors that I've experienced, and there are probably more, they're just the ones I've seen, have access to the stars. One was access to under the earth, and one was access into the atmosphere of the earth, and there's one that's accessible to the earth. And so they give you access into things which enable you to bring the kingdom into different realms. So, you know, I was given a mandate to go under the earth, and I think I've shared that before, in terms of going into Satan's trophy room and receiving back legacies and mantles and destinies and stuff, which, you know, when you're called to do the stuff you are in terms of releasing destiny, you need to be able to get there so you can release people's destiny out of Satan's trophy room. So there are other things, you know, in terms of access into the atmosphere of the earth and things. So wisdom herself, my personal experience of wisdom is not the 7 spirits of God, the spirit of wisdom. I believe that the 7 spirits of God are wisdom's handmaidens. And so I believe that they are there associated with wisdom in the training process for us to come into sonship and into our position of authority and to understand that. So I've met the spirit of wisdom a number of times, and that is not the same as wisdom as far as my perspective is. Doesn't look the same, is not the same at all. Wisdom is a female, and she is amazingly beautiful and not purely human looking, but really, really beautiful. And she has a bench, and I don't know if you've ever read the book The Shack. That book describes sort of the intimacy of the Father, Son, and the Spirit, but also wisdom is there in a bench, and I think that's true. You know, from my perspective, I've experienced that, and I have no problem in pursuing her because she calls to the sons of men, and she is the one who is there to help kings rule, princes rule, nobles rule, and to release rulership through that. So she gives you wisdom and insight into rulership and resources for rulership and other things. So yeah, that's my experience of the heights. You know, I'm not an expert in it. I've been there lots of times now, and I seek to pursue that, and I see that as a key for benches of 3 to be able to access wisdom there to help them rule. You know, that's the whole key thing, is to help them rule and to gain access to the resources and the dimensions of heaven through the different pathways that meet there, so that you can go to the different courts, so that you can get the different mandates that you need, so that you can get the authorizations and the different things in the different court systems of heaven. You know, wisdom taught me about the court of kings and the court of chancellors and the court of scribes. Initially, wisdom took me to the court of the upright so I could engage with the men in white linen, who, again, I believe that each bench of three will have an assignment of men in white linen who will be associated and recognize your ministry and will have mandates and mantles and things to pass on and wisdom to release, because they trade into what they see represents them. And so what they can pass the baton to, if you like, and cheer on and support and encourage. And you will find that there will be certain men in white linen, you know, women in white linen, because there's women associated with them as well in ours anyway, that you'll have to learn to engage with. You know, I've just got those 12 for us here. We've not engaged with them yet. We're still working things through how we engage with them. They turn up at some of our meetings, and they're waiting for our engagement because they have something to impart that was going to be key in helping us fulfill our destiny, because they have expertise and they've learned things and they have experience that passing on can really help. And so there's a whole dimension there around that which wisdom gave me access to, and I believe can give others access to as well. So yeah. So does that explain enough about that, heights? I mean, I don't want to be too descriptive, because it is multiverse, and it's like it will appear to you in a way which you will be able to relate to and you will be able to engage with. But there are some similar things because it describes it. You know, how you see it will be for you, but it's like those things are there. There are doors, there is the gateway to the city, there are paths, there is the way. It is on the heights, so it's at the highest point before there's access to the city. So, you know, there are keys and things there that will give some insight and into some understanding. But I would encourage you to read Proverbs 8, because it's a fascinating chapter as well, because it does talk about where wisdom was at the beginning, and it indicates some really interesting things, which I know Ian has taught. He shared some of it when he was here with us, so it's good stuff. So yeah.
You guys want to say something? I just wanted to know how you pursue. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Deborah. Yeah,
There we go.
Deborah.
There we
You know
go.
what, Mike? I never saw that before when you read that. By me, King's Rule. I was always thinking it was talking about Earth. It's not.
Yeah, but
Talking about in the heavens.
that's
By
the
me.
old way, you see.
It's exactly, and that's why you need to engage wisdom.
Yep.
By me, if you want to take your.
Yep.
It's so obvious.
Yeah, but it is really obvious when you see it. It's just not obvious when you don't, and that's why
I
this
always thought it was
revelation comes.
Earth.
Yeah, because that was the only way we had to think about it, because we didn't have access to the heavens. So how could it be a heavenly rule? You know, the same thing applies to Psalm 149 when it talks about binding the nobles with fetters and chains. And it's like, okay, you know, you could see that in an earthly perspective, but that's exactly what happens in the realms of heaven when we deal with the spiritual dynamics and the forces there. You know, using high praise and using things there, you know, because it talks about, using the high praises of God are in our mouth and we're on our beds. Well, it really doesn't mean that we're lying on our beds. It actually means that we're in intimacy with God. Because the bed is a representation of intimacy, you know. So that's, again, just a revelation that opens something up to a new dimension that you can see now that we couldn't see before. So, yeah.
And that's why it's so obvious. It's just what you said. You have to engage with.
Mm.
She's telling you have to.
Yeah.
How do you pursue her, Mike? How do you pursue wisdom? Do you just read the chapters? I've been reading 8. It's really powerful. But how do you pursue her actively?
Just the same way as you pursue anything else. You have it as the desire of your heart, and as the desire of your heart, when you step into the realms of heaven, you open your heart so that you can receive from and you breathe in the atmosphere of heaven that connects up with the desires that you're in your heart and begins to open the realm for those desires to be fulfilled. And so it's very much opening up the desires of our heart. And again, when you engage around the ark, part of the ark is about the tablets of the heart and engaging the scroll to our heart and writing things on the tablets of our heart, which will open up us to pursue and be connected to the desires that are there. And the way to, I mean, in a sense, I've led people there, because it's the same thing. I do exactly the same exercise. I would go into heaven through the open door, Jesus standing there, and Jesus takes you by the hand, and he takes you onto the heights. And then you can look into wisdom's face, and you can see wisdom, and you can begin to engage with wisdom in that place, so it is exactly the same process as every other engagement. Just step by faith and let Jesus take you there to engage with it and in it. But it is it is much easier to engage with wisdom when you're on your mountains, because wisdom's to do with ruling, whether it's kings, princes, nobles, bringing righteous judgments. It's all about ruling. So when you're established on your mountain, that gives you access into the different courts that you don't get access to when you're not on that, in that realm. I know Ian talks about it as I think it says sons who have their mountain legislative decrees. That's what he describes as giving access to the court of kings, which then gives you access to chancellors and the different things. So yeah, I mean, it's just pursuing the desires of your heart and asking God, Jesus, to take you there. But I've found that people engaging there works better when they're already in a place of rulership. The same with the seven spirits of God. The seven spirits of God tutor us and train us into sonship and position of rulership. And so we need to be in that realm. If we're still operating in servanthood and still operating in stewardship, and we've not yet entered through intimacy of friendship, then it's difficult to engage. A lot of people are struggling to engage the realms of heaven because they're still working through the process of trusting God and surrendering to God and making Jesus Lord. So if Jesus isn't Lord, then we can't be lords. If Jesus isn't king, then we can't be kings. If Jesus isn't father and God isn't father, how can we be sons? So it's a degree, where we come under his revelatory experience in personal encounter with him that takes us into different realms of authority. But he is looking for faithfulness. And so when Jesus actually said, to those who are faithful with little, more will be given. And so if people just want to jump into this amazing ministry of decreeing laws and making galaxies and doing that stuff without being faithful in loving your brother or exhibiting the fruit of the Spirit, it's never going to work. Because you have to have the fruit of character that goes with the position of authority. And that's why you have to have these two pathways of relationship and rulership working together, so that we can bring righteousness and justice, not just justice. And so a lot of people want to bring justice, but without the righteousness, and it doesn't work. And so God will entrust us with much more when we've been faithful with the little we've got. And God's looking at our hearts and looking at our desires and wants us to pursue that. But yeah, I mean, it's good.
I gotta ask a quick thing. So you said you find people engage with wisdom better if they're occupying their mountain, right?
Yeah.
So could that be as little as somebody mentoring people probably through a podcast or Skype teachings and things like that? Is that a way of beginning to occupy your mountain?
Well, it is if that's what you're called to do.
Okay.
You know, in a sense, your mountain is an actual place in the realms of the kingdom of God, and your mountain is really you. It's your scroll and place of authority, which is so tied up with you that it's where your throne is and where you have to be invested. And if someone's never been given a scepter or a crown or a mantle in any sort of encounter where they feel they've been authorized with authority, the technical term is investiture, then probably people aren't operating in a mountain. See, people can have stewardship of many different things. God gives resources, he gives commissions, he gives things for people to functions in the kingdom. People can have ministries which are all about stewardship. It's about being obedient and being a steward of what God gives. And God is looking for, in stewardship, looking for faithfulness. But what he's really looking for is the willingness to go beyond the ministry and the function and the doing into being. And so he's looking for friends. He's looking for those who aren't just so caught up in the doing of the ministry that they actually forget about the person and the relationship behind the ministry. And that's so important. And that is a mark that God is looking for, a desire for friendship and intimacy with him. So many ministries are so busy doing the ministry that they actually forget the relationship. And you know, you get so many people who get burnt out doing ministry because they're not connected to the source as they should be. You know, so many church leaders and pastors, it's like, well, they've got time to prepare their sermons and time to do this, but actually all their time with God is about preparation for what he's doing, not about just for their own relationship and personal intimacy. See, for me, when I look to engage with God in a deeper way, I knew I had to do that in my own personal time with him. Otherwise, people could say, well, it's easy for you, you can spend all day with God, you're paid to do that. And the reality was, you know, I chose to get up at 5 in the morning and chose up to get early to spend my own time with God, to develop my own relationship with God, to develop that friendship and intimacy, which then opened the door for him to give me access into lordship in the heavens. And so it is, some people are functioning in ministry as a stewardship that they've been given, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have access to mountains in heaven. That has to come out of friendship, intimacy, because Jesus said to his disciples, you know, I'm no longer going to call you servants or slaves, you're friends, and friends get revelatory information and sharing of things that stewards don't, because there's a deeper relationship that a friend has than a steward has with the master. And so the disciples had a relationship with Jesus that released deeper revelation of who he was and who they were, and God is looking for that desire. And so I believe that everybody will actually be able to access that mountain, because it's who they are, and to engage with the angel that's there, and to see the 7 mountains that flow out of that. You know, what are the 7 things that I'm called to have operation over, you know, in terms of in my own life, whether it's family or work or a ministry, it could be a prophetic or a healing or different things. Those are all personal things. Now, right now, most of those things in my own life are on hold. I have very clear dreams and visions about what God has shown me, about what I can do in the kingdom in terms of miracles and signs and wonders and healing and different things in the prophetic realm and stuff. But actually the key for me right now is to raise up others. Rather than doing them myself, it's about raising up others. And so I've put a lot of that stuff on hold to just pursue wisdom and seeking the realms of the kingdom, so that I can release others into that, because in the long run, that's going to have a greater multiplied effect on earth. And when we're in a position of being able to outwork the realms of the kingdom, we will see greater dimensions of miracles, greater dimensions of healing. We will be those that are operating the cities of refuge, and I'm not just talking about physical cities, but areas of refuge where people can be brought in and given the resources they need for their kingdom experiences and all that sort of stuff. And so, you know, in the past, I've been very much more involved in very hands-on, laying hands on lots of people, prophesying over people, releasing miracles, healing, and stuff like that. And I will do that again more in the future. But actually, this isn't the season for it. This is the season to prepare to operate in the realms of heaven, so we can see heaven manifested in that on earth. And you will only ever operate in a limited capacity if you're only operating in this sphere. And so we want to operate in the fullness of capacity, which is full sonship. And that is ruling from heaven, just like Jesus did on earth. And so it's not like, oh, well, I'm trying to get heaven to come down to earth. No, I'm in heaven, but I live on earth from my heavenly place. So I manifest in heaven on earth all the time as a gateway through my own life. But my personal call at the moment is to engage in those realms, to learn how to engage in the courts and to pursue wisdom in that, so that I can equip more people in that. And ultimately that will manifest on earth. You know, and so people will say, well, you're not seeing much of this, or you're not doing that. Because I feel called right now into pursuing the things in heaven, so I can equip and help people there. So yeah, there we go. Right, okay. Well, if we sort of leave it there,